Hello everyone, this is Dr. Abhishek, and the larger picture of creating this video is to have an overview of the opioid drugs, which are the common substance of abuse. As we all know, that Government of India has launched a Nasha Mukt Bharat Abhiyan and a vision document on narcotics control from 26 to 29. And opioid drugs, as we all know, they are the common substance of abuse. So before understanding opioids and how do they act, their mechanism of action, it is important to understand what is pain and what are the transmission pathways of pain, what is the endogenous opioid system, and where do opioids act, the various opioid receptors. So let us have a brief overview about pain and the pathways and the opioid receptors. Before we understand the mechanism of working of opioids, local anesthetics, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, that is NSAIDs, we first need to understand what is pain, that is the body's protective alarm. So according to the International Association for the Study of Pain, pain is an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with or resembling actual or potential tissue damage. So, as the definition suggests, pain has two components, emotional and sensory component. Sensory component tells you the physical aspects of the pain, while the emotional component tells you how unpleasant the pain feels, the level of discomfort or the distress, the anxiety and the fear associated with the pain, and how does it affect the mood and the quality of life. So why do we need pain? It is a body's defense mechanism. Suppose you touch a hot iron. Unless the body triggers an alarm, you will not remove your hand from the hot iron. So it warns the body. The pain is a protective alarm system that warns the body about the danger and helps prevent further injury. Without the pain, the body would not recognize danger. Now, if we briefly classify pain, pain can be nociceptive pain. It is caused by the activation of pain receptors, that is the nociceptors, which are available at peripheral nerve endings. Examples include surgical incision, bone fracture, burns, and trauma. Then inflammatory pain, it is caused because of inflammation releases chemicals that sensitize nociceptors. So inflammatory mediators include prostaglandins, bradykinin, histamine, serotonin, and cytokines. Then third category is neuropathic pain. It is caused by injury to the nerve itself. Example include diabetic neuropathy, postherpetic neuralgia, and trigeminal neuralgia. Now, before we understand how opioids, the local anesthetics, and NSAIDs work, it is also important to understand the pain pathway. That is the journey of a pain signal from the site of injury to the brain. So, pain pathway, it consists of four main steps. First step is the transduction. Second is transmission. Third is the perception, and fourth is modulation. We will discuss these steps one by one, and later on we will come again to this slide for more explanation. Now, transduction is the first step in the pain pathway. Transduction is the process by which a noxious stimulus is converted into an electrical signal in nociceptors. Suppose an injury caused by the noxious stimulus like pinprick, heat, or chemical. So immediately when an injury occurs, it leads to release of chemicals. The damaged cells release chemicals like bradykinin, prostaglandins, ATP, histamine, serotonin. So the release of chemicals, they stimulate the free nerve endings, that is the nociceptors, and there is generation of action potential in the nociceptors. Nociceptor activation takes place, and pain is transmitted to the spinal cord. Now the second process in the pain pathway is the transmission. The transmission is the process by which electrical signal from the activated nociceptors travel to the spinal cord and then ascends to the brain. So it occurs mainly through peripheral nerve fibers. Among the peripheral nerve fibers, the most important are the A delta fibers and the C fibers. A delta fibers are myelinated fibers, so transmission is fast through the A delta fibers. C fibers are unmyelinated fibers and the transmission is slow through the C fibers. So the pain felt through the A delta fibers is fast, sharp and well localized pain, while the C fibers, the transmission to the C fibers, it is slow, dull, burning pain. Now the third step in the pain pathway is perception. The perception is the process by which brain interprets the pain signal and becomes consciously aware of the pain, including its location, intensity and unpleasantness. Like where is the pain, how strong is the pain, then how bothersome or distressing is it, then fear, anxiety, stress or discomfort associated with the pain, and then what should I do, whether to avoid it or protect it or seek help. So all this perception, this is the third step, and the different brain areas like the somatosensory cortex, the insula, the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, etc., they work together in perception. Again, modulation is the fourth step in the pain pathway. It is the process by which nervous system regulates, inhibits or amplifies the pain signals before they are perceived. So how modulation works, we will see it later on. Now, before we discuss the opioid drugs, we need to first understand the endogenous opioid system, which is the body's natural painkiller. Even before the morphine was discovered, nature had already invented opioids. So, body produces its own opioid chemicals that act on the opioid receptors to reduce pain. So, whenever pain occurs, the brain detects this pain and the body releases natural opioids. These opioids are of four types: endorphin, enkephalin, dynorphin, and endomorphins. So, body releases natural opioids, the pain transmission decreases, and the pain becomes more tolerable. So, this happens in many situations like accidents, road traffic accidents, sports and exercise, during childbirth, surgery and trauma, severe stress and fear. Now, coming to the type of endogenous opioids, the most common is the endorphins. They are the natural opioids made by our body and they are produced mainly in the brain and the pituitary gland. What do? They reduce the pain, they improve the mood, reduce stress and anxiety, create a sense of well being, and increase exercise intolerance. Athletes, and while running, we often experience a runner's high. This is because of natural endorphins. Then, in laughter and happiness, endorphins are released. During meditation and relaxation, also endorphins are released. So, endorphins can be called as body's natural painkillers. Now, the next category of endogenous opioid is enkephalin. It can be thought of as body's natural gatekeeper. It acts in the spinal cord as gatekeepers. So, whenever a pain signal comes to the spinal cord, it decides which pain signal to pass and which pain signal not to pass. So, it acts as a gatekeeper. It allows some pain signals to pass to the brain while it restricts most of the pain signals not to pass to the brain. So, it acts as a gatekeeper. Again, dynorphins are also body's natural painkillers. They are natural opioid peptides that bind to the kappa opioid receptors and they decrease the pain signal. Again, endomorphins, they are also natural opioid peptides that bind to the mu opioid receptors and reduce pain signal transmission. Now, what is the clinical relevance of endogenous opioid system? We all have read about placebo effect. A person is given a sugar pill instead of an active drug for treating any disease. So, expectation of a pain relief can trigger the release of endogenous opioids and it can lead to real pain relief even with an inactive pill. During severe injury or surgery or extreme stress, endogenous opioids are released So it is helpful in stress induced analgesia. Then it also helps in natural pain modulation. It reduces the pain signals in the spinal cord, modulating pain in the brain and improving coping and tolerance to pain. Now, how do opioid receptors act? So, opioid receptors are basically G protein coupled receptors. So, whenever any opioid or endogenous opioid binds to the opioid receptor, it leads to the activation of GI protein. So, there are three mechanisms by which opioid action takes place. First is the inhibition of adenylyl cyclase. As we all know that adenylyl cyclase acts on the ATP, leading to the production of cyclic AMP. So inhibition of adenylyl cyclase leads to less production of cyclic AMP, leading to decreased neuronal activity. Then it also inhibits the calcium channels at the presynaptic terminal. Less calcium influx means less release of neurotransmitters like substance P and glutamate. Then thirdly, the activation of potassium channels at the postsynaptic neuron, leading to increased potassium efflux. This causes hyperpolarization and the neuron becomes less excited. Before we go further, we need to understand the pharmacological concept of affinity and intrinsic activity. Affinity tells us how strongly a drug binds to its receptor, and intrinsic activity or the efficacy tells us what the drug does once it binds to the receptor. So according to the intrinsic activity or the efficacy, the drugs are divided into full agonist, partial agonist, which shows partial intrinsic activity, and antagonist, which shows no activity at all. So classification of opioids based on the receptor action: full agonists shows full affinity and full intrinsic activity. Examples include morphine, fentanyl, heroin, methadone, oxycodone, and hydromorphone. Partial agonist, which shows partial intrinsic activity but high affinity. It strongly binds to the receptor, but the receptor is activated only partially, so there is moderate effect. So examples include buprenorphine and pentazocine. Then antagonist include are the drugs where there is high affinity but no intrinsic activity is shown. That is, the drug binds strongly to the receptor but it does not activate the receptor, so there is no effect and it blocks the other opioids. Examples include naloxone, naltrexone, and nalmefene. Now we will discuss about the action of endogenous opioids and opioids on the peripheral nerves and the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. So opioids act on the peripheral nociceptor endings. The actions include decreased excitability of nociceptors, decreased release of inflammatory mediators, and less generation of pain impulses. As we all know that the pain impulses travel through the A delta fibers, which are the fast myelinated fibers, while the C fibers, type C fibers, they are the slow and unmyelinated fibers. And after reaching the spinal cord, they synapse at the substantia gelatinosa of the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. As we have discussed earlier, in the presynaptic terminal, there is mu receptor activation. So it leads to inhibition of voltage gated calcium channels. So there is decreased calcium influx and accordingly there is lesser release of neurotransmitters like substance P and glutamate. While in postsynaptic terminal, mu receptor activation leads to activation of potassium channel, leading to more potassium efflux, leading to hyperpolarization and thus decreased neuronal excitability in the postsynaptic terminal. Now, one important difference between opioid and local anesthetic is that opioid reduce pain transmission by decreasing the neurotransmitter release and neuronal excitability at the peripheral endings and in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. But the opioids do not block nerve conduction. Action potential still travel along the A delta and C fibers to the spinal cord, but the message is not passed effectively due to decreased neurotransmitter release and lesser neuronal excitability at the postsynaptic terminal. While in local anesthetics like lidocaine, they block the nerve conduction by inhibiting the voltage gated sodium channels. So it prevents the generation and propagation of action potential itself. So in this way, the action of local anesthetics differ from that of opioids. Now, opioids act at multiple levels to reduce transmission and perception of pain. As we all know, that the spinothalamic tract, which is the ascending pathway from the dorsal horn of the spinal cord to the brain, it is responsible for transmission of pain and temperature sensations from the spinal cord to the brain. So, opioid action activates the mu receptors along the spinothalamic tract, and it inhibits the transmission of pain impulses upward. So the result is lesser pain signals ascend to the higher centers. Then in the brain stem, there is periaqueductal gray matter and rostral ventromedial medulla (RVM). So activation of mu receptors in the periaqueductal gray matter and rostral ventromedial medulla enhances the descending inhibitory pathways. So there is increased release of serotonin and noradrenaline to the spinal cord. So result is increased descending inhibition and reduced pain transmission. Then again in the thalamus, it is the brain's relay station for the pain. So activation of mu receptors in the thalamic nuclei decreases the relay of pain signals to the cerebral cortex. So result is relay of pain signals to the cortex reduces. Then again in the cerebral cortex is responsible for conscious perception and emotional experience of pain. So activation of mu receptors in the cerebral cortex and the limbic system reduces the perception of pain intensity and emotional distress. So again the net result is reduced perception of pain and reduced suffering and distress. So this is the basic mechanism of how the endogenous opioids act. What is the mechanism of action of opioid receptors? Where do opioid receptors act? And this was all important to understand the various opioid drugs, which we will discuss in the subsequent video. Thank you.